Polish millionaire is speaking out today after facing backlash for stealing a hat from a child at the U.S. Open this week, and it wasn't to apologize.
A hat meant for a child, stolen in front of millions. One careless act turned a CEO into a villain and sparked a storm that money could never control. This is the story of snatching hat from kid at U.S. Open. A hat meant for a child. A hat that should have created a memory of a lifetime for one young fan, but instead turned into a scandal when a wealthy CEO reached in and grabbed it for himself. The moment was captured on camera. The boy's face showed shock, confusion, and disappointment, and the crowd reacted immediately. Within minutes, the clip spread across the internet and became a global story. The match itself had been electric. Polish tennis player Kamil Majchrzak had just claimed a victory and wanted to give something back to the fans. He spotted a boy named Brock close to the court, a wide-eyed fan who was soaking up every second of the experience. Majchrzak removed his cap and held it out as a gift. It was a small gesture, but a powerful one, the kind of act that makes sports unforgettable for young fans. Then came the twist. Before the cap ever reached Brock's hands, a man sitting nearby leaned in and took it. That man was Pod Sharik, a CEO from Poland. The boy tried to protest, but the cap was already in the man's possession. The look on Brock's face was enough to tell the story. The magic of the moment had been stolen in front of thousands in the arena and millions watching at home. The internet erupted. By the time most people woke up the next morning, the video was everywhere. Twitter feeds, Instagram reels, and TikTok edits replayed the clip over and over. The hashtags came quickly. Hashtag #HatSnatch, hashtag Leave the Kid Alone, hashtag Greedy CEO. Commentators compared it to baseball games where adults wrestle foul balls away from children. Parenting blogs condemned it as an example of how not to treat kids. Business writers called it a metaphor for corporate greed. As the video spread, online sleuths quickly identified the man. His name was Pod Sharik, the head of Dragbrook, a paving company in Poland. What had been a viral clip suddenly turned into a scandal with a face and a business attached.
Yikes. This happened after a match when tennis star Kamil Majchrzak was signing autographs after his win.
Searches for his company no longer showed ads or positive press. Instead, they were filled with memes, criticism, and outrage. For a CEO, this was a nightmare. Meanwhile, Majchrzak stepped up. Refusing to let the story end on a sour note, he turned to social media and asked fans to help him track down the boy. The search worked. Brock was found, and the tennis player met him in person, signed memorabilia, and gave him more gifts. The boy walked away smiling, his disappointment eased by the kindness of the player. The contrast was striking. The athlete became a hero, and the CEO became a villain in the eyes of the public. Through it all, Sharik stayed silent. No statement, no apology, no explanation. That silence spoke louder than any words. It made the incident look deliberate and arrogant. The longer he said nothing, the worse it looked. People speculated about his motives, wondering if he regularly attended events trying to collect souvenirs. Others mocked him as the most embarrassing millionaire in the spotlight. Finally, under heavy pressure, Sharik broke his silence. Days after the incident, he posted a statement on his company's website. In it, he said he believed the cap was being handed to him and not the boy. He explained that his sons had asked for autographs earlier, and in the chaos of the crowd, he thought Majchrzak was giving the hat to them. He admitted it was a mistake and apologized to the boy, his family, the fans, and the player. The words, however, raised more questions. In one part of the statement, he described the boy as injured, which confused readers. Some believed he meant emotional hurt. Others wondered if the translation was awkward. More importantly, when people compared his explanation to the video, The two stories did not match. The clip showed a man snatching the cap with clear intent, ignoring the boy's reaction. His apology suggested a misunderstanding. On paper, it might have seemed plausible, but on video, it looked greedy and deliberate. And that is why the scandal refused to die. The apology did not close the story. The video told its own truth, and for millions of viewers, that truth was impossible to ignore.
The CEO of a Polish company has come out with an apology after a video went viral.
The Internet Firestorm. The apology was supposed to settle the matter, but instead it sparked another wave of debate. For many people, the timing itself felt suspicious. Why wait days before saying anything if it had all been a simple misunderstanding? Why let silence fuel the outrage before finally speaking? The delay made some believe that the only reason he apologized at all was because he got caught. Television networks replayed his statement alongside the viral video. Side by side, the contrast was impossible to ignore. The words described a mistake, a mix-up, an innocent error in the chaos of the crowd. The footage showed something else, a clear grab, a child's protest, and a man who did not let go. The internet thrives on these contradictions, and the gap between what he said and what people saw became the center of the storm. YouTubers and commentators slowed the video frame by frame, highlighting the boy's reaction. TikTok creators layered his apology over the clip, mocking the disconnect between the two. Instagram Reels used captions like "accident or arrogance" and "watch the truth with your own eyes." The result was brutal. His explanation looked less like honesty and more like damage control. Media frenzy. The story had all the ingredients the media craves: a millionaire CEO, a helpless child, a viral video, and a silence that lasted too long. News anchors asked experts to analyze body language. Psychologists talked about power dynamics, explaining how small acts can reveal deeper traits. Business magazines turned it into a case study on corporate image in the age of social media. Tabloids dug into his background. Old interviews were revisited, and old photos were reprinted. Images that once looked ordinary were now framed as evidence of arrogance. A smirk at a gala became a symbol of entitlement. A sharp response to a journalist years earlier resurfaced as a warning sign. Late-night comedians piled on, cracking jokes about CEOs needing to steal hats for bonuses, or walking into stadiums just to collect souvenirs from kids. Laughter turned the scandal into entertainment, but each punchline also kept the controversy alive.
Yeah, the video posted online shows the moment the CEO of a paving company was caught grabbing away the signed hat, which was meant to be given to that young boy.
Public reaction. Among the public, opinions split sharply. Some argued that people were overreacting. They said it was just a hat, that the boy was not harmed, and that social media had turned a silly moment into a global drama. They believed the CEO had been clumsy, not cruel. To them, the outrage was exaggerated, but for many parents, the story struck a nerve. They pointed out that no adult should ever take something from a child without asking. It was not about the hat itself, it was about respect. The boy had been publicly embarrassed, his moment stolen, and no child should have to endure that. For these parents, it was not harmless at all. It was a lesson in boundaries, power, and how children should be treated. The boy's family also added weight to the conversation. They acknowledged the apology, but said clearly that their son had been hurt by the incident. He had expected a moment of joy, only to be left confused and embarrassed in front of millions. They were not after money or attention. They simply wanted their child to be treated with dignity. That honesty made it difficult for people to dismiss the controversy as overblown. Why the apology fell flat. In the end, the biggest problem with the apology was that it did not match the evidence. The video was crystal clear. The boy resisted, the man pulled, and the hat was taken. No explanation could change what people saw with their own eyes. His words may have checked the right boxes, but they failed to bridge the gap between perception and reality. The internet does not forgive easily, and it certainly does not forget. Once the video became a symbol, the apology could not undo it. Instead of closing the chapter, his statement only reminded people of the clip itself. Every headline, every reaction, every meme reinforced the same image. A powerful man taking something from a child and refusing to admit it honestly. The scandal was no longer about a single hat. It had grown into something larger, a conversation about arrogance, leadership, and the consequences of being careless in a world where every action is recorded. For Pod Sharik, the incident was no longer a moment he could walk away from. It had become the story that defined him. The internet has a way of turning one mistake into a search for patterns. Once the video went viral and his name was revealed, people were no longer satisfied with just that single clip. They wanted to know if this was an isolated blunder or if it revealed something deeper about who Pod Sharik really was. The result was a wave of digging, investigating, and resurfacing old stories that had long been forgotten. Old stories come back. Former employees began speaking out. Some described him as a driven, visionary leader who pushed his company to new heights. Others told stories of a man who could be cold, dismissive, and impatient, especially with people lower on the corporate ladder. These anecdotes might have seemed trivial at another time, but now they were taken as evidence that the arrogance seen at the US Open had always been there. Clips from past shareholder meetings were rediscovered online. In one, he brushed off a question about wages with a quick laugh. Back then, it came across as confidence. Now, replayed through the lens of the hat scandal, it looked smug and uncaring. Old photographs were also re-examined, with small gestures or expressions reinterpreted as arrogance. What once looked ordinary now seemed incriminating. Even classmates from his university days were interviewed. Some described a young man with enormous ambition who often treated others as stepping stones. It painted a picture of someone who had always believed he was destined to stand above others. Commentators began asking if the hat incident was not just a random mistake, but rather the most public example of a long-standing pattern. Was it really about a cap, or was it about a mindset where taking came more naturally than giving? Psychologists appeared on talk shows to analyze the act. They explained how people in positions of power sometimes feel a sense of entitlement without even realizing it. Years of influence and wealth can dull empathy, they said. And what looks like arrogance to the outside world might simply feel normal to someone used to always getting what they want. Others argued that leaders are still human and can act out of impulse like anyone else. But the louder voices insisted that this was not an accident. It was a window into his true character. Scrutiny on the company. The focus then shifted from the man to the business he ran. Journalists began investigating Dragbrook, the paving company that Sharik had turned into a powerhouse. Reports looked at pay gaps, labor conditions, and competition. Critics drew parallels between snatching a hat from a child and snatching opportunities from smaller companies. Headlines began to ask whether his business practices reflected the same disregard for fairness that the video seemed to show. Search results for Dragbrook turned toxic. Instead of promotional material or company milestones, searches were filled with memes, parodies, and harsh criticism. Even potential clients and partners who tried to look up the company were met with negative press. In the digital age, where reputation travels faster than fact, this kind of backlash was devastating. Protests and public outcry. The controversy grew to the point where small protests formed outside the company's headquarters. People held signs with slogans like, "Respect kids, respect workers," and "Leadership means dignity." For many, the hat incident became more than just an embarrassing clip. It became a symbol of arrogance, privilege, and the imbalance between those with power and those without. Activists used the scandal to highlight bigger issues in corporate culture, turning one man's mistake into an example of how leaders should be held accountable for both their actions and the values they represent. The boy's disappointed face became a rallying image, plastered on posters and banners as proof that respect must come before power. The weight of perception. For Pod Sharik, the hardest part was realizing how quickly decades of success could be overshadowed by seconds of poor judgment. He had worked for years to craft an image of a disciplined businessman, a leader who always stayed in control. But now, for millions of people, he was not the man who built a company. He was the man who stole a hat from a child. The internet had drawn its conclusion, and no apology could fully rewrite the story. His silence had made it worse. His explanation had not matched the video, and the digging into his past only reinforced the image that people had already decided was true. He was no longer battling a single scandal. He was battling a narrative, and once that narrative takes root, it becomes almost impossible to change. What began as a playful gesture gone wrong had transformed into something much larger. It was no longer about Brock's hat. It was about leadership, arrogance, and the fragile balance between power and responsibility. For Sharik, the weight of perception was heavier than any business challenge he had ever faced. When a personal scandal becomes a corporate problem, the playbook almost always looks the same. Crisis meetings, late-night calls with public relations teams, carefully worded statements, and a scramble to reassure both the public and investors. Dragbrook, the company run by Pod Sharik, was no exception. Inside the headquarters, the mood shifted from confidence to crisis. Executives who once proudly associated themselves with Sharik now wondered how to distance the company from his mistake without making him look weak. Board members pressured him to respond faster and more convincingly. Sponsors quietly reached out, asking if their names would be dragged into the controversy. The company's communications team drafted multiple versions of statements, testing which sounded apologetic without admitting too much. But in the world of viral scandals, even the best-prepared PR strategies have limits. Every polished statement was immediately compared against the raw footage of the hat snatch. Every sentence was picked apart online, and every attempt at damage control seemed to remind people of the very incident they were trying to bury. The PR strategy. Dragbrook's official channels moved quickly to show that the company cared. Posts appeared highlighting its community work, donations to charities, and partnerships with youth sports programs. Press releases emphasized years of supporting children and athletes, framing the incident as out of character for both the CEO and the brand. Sharik's own apology was republished on the company website and shared across corporate accounts. The intention was clear. If people saw enough reminders of his remorse, the anger might soften. Comments, however, told a different story. Underneath every post about charity or community support, angry users flooded the replies with the same message: "Give the kid his hat." Some online critics mocked the campaign, saying the company was trying to buy back goodwill that could not be purchased. Others accused the firm of caring more about image than sincerity. What was meant to be a show of responsibility was interpreted as deflection. Internal fallout. Inside Dragbrook, employees felt the tension firsthand. Staff members who had nothing to do with the scandal suddenly found themselves questioned by friends, family, and even clients. Some reported feeling embarrassed to say where they worked. Others worried that business partners might pull out of deals. Private chat groups within the company buzzed with frustration. Should they defend their boss online, or should they remain silent? Some felt loyal, insisting he had been misunderstood. Others admitted that defending him was impossible when the video was so clear. The culture of unity that had once defined Dragbrook was beginning to crack. Morale dipped. Even routine meetings carried an awkward air, as employees wondered if they were being judged outside the office for what their leader had done. For a company that prided itself on discipline and professionalism, this was a wound that no quarterly report could hide. Financial pressure. Investors also grew uneasy. Financial analysts started including reputational risk in their reports, warning that public perception could hurt future growth. Some partners considered pausing collaborations, worried about being tied to the scandal. Competitors quietly took advantage, pointing out that Dragbrook's brand had been tarnished. Stock prices fluctuated. While not catastrophic, the instability was a warning sign. In business, confidence matters as much as numbers, and confidence was slipping. Sharik himself faced growing pressure from within. Board members asked if he should temporarily step back from public appearances. Some even hinted that he should consider resigning as CEO to protect the company's long-term image. The idea was not yet serious, but the fact that it was whispered at all showed how much had changed in a short time. Public distrust. For the public, nothing Dragbrook said seemed to matter. The video was too strong, too simple, and too damning. People trusted their own eyes more than press releases. The boy's reaction, the crowd's disappointment, and the unapologetic body language captured in those few seconds outweighed every line of explanation. The company tried to clarify that many of the rumors spreading online were false. Fake statements and quotes had circulated, allegedly from Sharik and his lawyers, threatening critics and mocking the backlash. Dragbrook denied them all. They said no threats were made, no lawsuits were considered, and that much of what people were sharing was fabricated. But the clarification came too late. Once misinformation spreads online, it becomes part of the story. Even worse, his decision to limit comments on his official posts made people more suspicious. Instead of appearing protective of his family, it looked like he was running from criticism. Transparency would have been risky, but shutting down discussion looked like weakness. The battle of narratives. At this point, the scandal was no longer about what actually happened at the US Open. It was about the competing stories. On one side was the video, clear and unforgettable. On the other side were apologies, explanations, and corporate statements. And when people had to choose which story to believe, most sided with what they saw. The apology, while necessary, had fallen flat. The PR campaigns had not shifted the narrative. The company's attempts at damage control only highlighted how fragile its reputation had become. The hat snatch was no longer a single embarrassing mistake. It was a symbol of arrogance, a lesson in how quickly a reputation can collapse, and a reminder that in the digital age, leaders cannot afford even the smallest lapse in judgment. By the time the dust began to settle, the damage was already done. What could have been brushed off as an awkward misunderstanding had turned into a defining moment. For Pod Sharik, the fallout stretched far beyond a single viral video. It changed how people saw him, how they talked about him, and how they remembered his name. The hat snatch became shorthand for arrogance. On social media, people used his name as a punchline whenever someone powerful acted selfishly. In memes, his face was pasted onto characters grabbing toys from children or clinging to trophies that were never theirs. For a man who had spent decades building a reputation as a disciplined, successful leader, it was a humiliation that no amount of wealth could erase. A reputation in question. In business, reputation is currency. Investors, partners, and employees do not just follow balance sheets, they follow trust. For years, Sharik had been respected as a builder of companies and a strategist with vision. After the scandal, those qualities were overshadowed by a single question. If he could embarrass a child in public without hesitation, what did that say about his character behind closed doors? The whispers grew louder. Was he the kind of leader who demanded respect without giving it? Did he value appearances more than people? These were not fair questions, perhaps, but they were inevitable. Once a leader's image is cracked, every old story, every small complaint, and every rumor looks like proof. The business impact. Dragbrook survived, but not without scars. Some contracts went ahead as planned, but others stalled. A few partners quietly stepped away, saying nothing publicly but unwilling to tie their name to the controversy. Recruitment became harder too. Young professionals, especially those who grew up in the social media era, hesitated to join a company associated with a viral scandal. Financially, the impact was measurable but not catastrophic. The company still paved roads, still delivered projects, and still generated profit. But the brand lost its shine. Dragbrook was no longer just a paving company. It was the company whose CEO stole a hat from a child. That stigma clung to every press release and every Google search. Lessons in leadership. For many observers, the incident became a case study. Business schools discussed it in lectures on crisis management. Commentators used it as an example of how not to handle public mistakes. The key lesson was simple. In a world where everything is recorded, leaders cannot afford careless actions. The hat itself was meaningless. It was cheap, disposable, and easy to replace. But symbols matter more than objects. To a boy, that cap represented recognition from a hero. To the crowd, it represented fairness. To the internet, it represented the imbalance of power between the privileged and the powerless. And once the symbol was broken, the story was unstoppable. Sharik's apology might have been well written, but it lacked what people wanted most: sincerity. People wanted to see humility, not corporate polish. They wanted him to admit clearly what everyone saw in the video, rather than lean on confusion and mistranslation. By failing to match his words to the evidence, he deepened the distrust.
Adding that he did not intend to steal the hat from the boy and that it was sent back to him, hoping to repair any harm he may have caused.
The boy's story. For Brock, the boy at the center of it all, the story ended on a happier note. Thanks to Kamil Mishrzak, he still got the recognition he deserved. The player tracked him down, met him in person, and gave him more than just a hat. He gave him a memory to treasure, a moment of kindness that outweighed the embarrassment of that night. In a way, the boy became the quiet hero of the story. His disappointment reminded people why fairness matters. His smile when Mishrzak made things right reminded them why athletes are celebrated for their generosity as much as for their victories. For him, the memory would last forever. For Sharik, it would haunt forever. What happens next? As weeks turned into months, the scandal gradually faded from headlines, but it never fully disappeared. The internet ensured that the clip remained searchable, replayed, and shared whenever people wanted to talk about arrogance or entitlement. His name became linked to that one action, no matter how much else he had achieved. For Pod Sharik, the choice was clear. He could either continue trying to fight the narrative or accept it and rebuild quietly. Reports suggested that he pulled back from public appearances, limited his media presence, and focused on running his company behind the scenes. His influence was still there, but the spotlight was no longer his friend. The lesson was obvious to everyone watching. Power does not protect against scrutiny. Wealth does not shield against shame. And in an age where every action can be recorded, the smallest mistake can echo louder than a lifetime of success. If this story made you think twice about power and respect, hit like, leave your comment, and subscribe. More shocking stories are coming that expose the truth behind today's headlines.